Hello. Uh, Hello and welcome to 3ta Kura. This is going to be a new show format that we're trying. म चाहिँ तपाईँको host आदित्य.
अनि म हिमाल.
अनि हामी चाहिँ we're going to pick 3 topics that are of our interest, be it like अहिलेको current newsहरुमा भइरहेको कुराहरु, current eventsहरु, or anything that we find interesting that's going on right now, हैन. अनि also lastमा चाहिँ यो हरेक एपिसोडको लास्टमा चाहिँ we're going to give out some recommendations, be it like some videos to watch or like some movies we find interesting or some music we find interesting or articles you should read भनेर हामी लास्टमा चाहिँ recommendations दिन्छौँ. Or books. So anything at all, I know. So the whole point of this thing is to stay up to date about what's going on, or like, talk about things, learn new things, and talk about things we find interesting. So आजको 3टा कुरा सुरु गरौँ.
I think we should start off with whatever is the biggest in the news. Nepalमा elections भइरहेछ.
Yes.
As we speak this, we're recording this on a Tuesday evening. And the counting is going on. And I think by the time this comes out, we'll have few candidates or most of our candidates elected. And I think this is a very interesting election. I've just been looking at the big numbers. And without saying too much about what I like and what I don't like, specifically candidates, I think the theme of this election is that you can't ignore the new people that are coming around.
Yeah, I think अहिले यो पालिको like हुन्छ नि नेपालको political scene चाहिँ is changing so rapidly. I think after हुन्छ नि Balin became mayor, it kind of opened the way for people to law like change हुनु सक्छ. You can like actually elect somebody who's not from a party. You can actually elect somebody who's an individual candidate. त्यो पोर्टलै खुले जस्तो भयो क्या. अनि now we're seeing त्यो Avengers Endgame मा त्यस्तो पोर्टल खोलेर सबै त्यो के स्वतन्त्र
I think it's काठमाडौँको कुन चाहिँ क्षेत्र हो म यतिकै लिस्ट हेरेर थिएँ इलेक्सनको अनि there were more than 10 independent candidates त्यो particular electorate मात्रै which is a big number. I think that is a fad. I think that will die out. त्यो way चाहिँ it should पनि because it doesn't make sense, especially नेपालमा 25 वटा candidates उठ्यो भने it's basically everybody that is everybody is sort of fighting for the same votes, at least at this point of time. And it's good to be a part of the process, and it's starting something good, but then I think that will go away eventually. But जब consolidate हुन्छ, I think it will be quite strong because some of these things are remarkable. हुन्छ नि कति इलेक्टरेट्सहरुमा same partyले same मान्छेले जितिरहेको ठाउँमा them lagging far behind, and these new candidates from a party that's barely a year old sort of making big moves. I think that's very interesting.
It is that. Only now you see Noya and actually youthful candidates coming up who are actually like all interesting candidates are. And I think let's say the role of social media, and I like how the election committee is kind of like using the whole TikToker scene or to the TikToker scene or
Fine, so I'm not on.
I'm not on much of your TikTok words. So they're actually using TikTokers, the social media influencer, to actually promote people to go vote. That being said, I think the voter turnout has been lower this year.
The voter turnout this year has been 61%. That is the lowest we've had in Nepal's democratic election since 1993. This is not lower than that. I think 3 years on 3 different elections, the voter turnout has been around 61%. And this is one of them. This is the third time that we have had a turnout this low.
Do you also think this is because I think the voter demographic is kind of changing?
Probably. एउटा त उ पनि हो जस्तो लाग्छ मलाई कि मान्छेहरु अलिकति फ्रस्ट्रेट पनि भयो कि जस्तो लाग्छ मलाई चाहिँ कता कता. So I think there were two strands of people. एउटा चाहिँ we have to do something, we have to make an effort, and we have to go vote भन्ने पनि थियो होला नै, because you wouldn't see new candidates coming up if that segment wasn't there. But apart from that, some people are also commenting कि मान्छेलाई अलिकति फ्रस्ट्रेसन भएर केही भइरहेको छैन, म गएर भोट गरिरहेको छु, ट्राई गरिरहेको छु, बट आउटकम्स केही आइरहेको छैन भन्ने कारणले अलिकति डिसस्याटिस्फ्याक्सनले गर्दा पनि भएको हुनसक्छ भन्ने छ. और अब एउटा नम्बर अर्को थाहा नहुने नम्बर चाहिँ percentage of the expected voter base is outside भन्ने कुरा पनि unclear नै छ because
But I
त्यो
think
39% मा हामी दुवैजना छौँ actually
yeah exactly म त्यो पनि मलाई चाहिँ also like people who actually want to vote अब suppose म अब उता नेपालमा भएको भए हामीहरूलाई obviously we would actively vote होइन तर I think यो COVID पछि maybe we'll also have to account the people that have gone abroad a massive inflow of people gone abroad त्यो पनि maybe account गर्नु मिल्छ अनि also I think यो जुन चाहिँ हामीले last time पनि एकचोटि कुरा गरेको थियौँ नि like how the हामीले जुन इलेक्सन त्यो प्रिडिक्सन कसरी गर्छ र आउटकम इज हाउ इज इट डिफरेन्ट भनेर तपाईँ म एकचोटि भन्नुभएको थियो नि
बेसिकली यो इलेक्सन्सहरू अब नेपालमा चाहिँ दिस इज नट रेलेभेन्ट यो दिस फ्याक्ट इज बेसिकली विथ द युएस इलेक्सन्स किनभने यो मिड टर्म इलेक्सन्समा युएसमा there was this big fear because Trump was getting really popular and there were these absolutely ludicrous candidates that were running for elections. Basically Trump's candidates, they were referred to as Trump's candidates. So by and large, the expectation was it's going to be a big Republican wave and then they're going to win big time. The elections happened, nothing big happened. The Republicans didn't win big. Republicans took the House. Democrats kept the Senate. So it was not that weird, results. Why is that happening? It turns out US polling happens pretty much the old way. US polling, they create a random sample and they have to make about 15,000 calls to get about 500 responses or something like that. It's in that magnitude. I'm not sure of the exact number, but that's what it looks like. And they call people and they ask questions about what are your important issues, what issues would you vote on, what issues would affect your opinion of the candidate. खाले क्वेसन्सहरुदेखि लिएर basically election predict गर्ने खालको क्वेसन्सहरुसम्म त्यसैमा सोध्छ हैन. So basically this whole prediction of who's going to win comes from these phone calls. Young people don't pick up strange phone calls. Young people don't answer these surveys. It takes too long. So basically the whole voter base that is actually going out and voting, a large chunk of them say it's not represented in these polls. And you can see parallels of this in Nepal itself between what young people are talking about online and what we see in the elections. 3ta reason. It's like what you see on social media is sort of the top 1% of the demographic, top 10% of the demographic. So it's not representative in the first place. Orko चाहिँ this doesn't capture all the opinions, everything that's going on. And I was surprised that अर्को इन्ट्रेस्टिङ उ लागेको चाहिँ मलाई यो इलेक्सनमा शेरबहादुर देवाको अगेन्स्टमा सागर ढकाल द इन्डिपेन्डेन्ट क्यान्डिडेट I don't think he's going to win. He's lagging far behind. I'm not sure if that election's been called as of now. But the number of votes he's got, it's actually quite astounding. So I'm not going to rule out anything for the next elections.
Yeah, मैले पनि I think सागर ढकालको कुरामा चाहिँ I think like जित्ने भनेर चाहिँ आशावादी चाहिँ I mean kind of I was hopeful हैन तर obviously like जित्छ भनेर चाहिँ लागेको थिएन हैन तर like obviously to get that amount of vote is also pretty good के हैन
That too against शेरबहादुर देवा.
Exactly that too त्यो ठाउँमा हैन तर I think अहिले चाहिँ like यो podcast and everything गर्दाखेरि पनि like social media itself has become a great tool to get to people. Okay, now at least like they're putting some effort to like get to know your candidate. Khali, but that's I really appreciate, and then at least people can listen to at least contents. Okay, Rambro to actually understand who's up. If you want to do some research, to research गर्ने पनि content चाहिँ छ के त्यतिसम्म चाहिँ we're getting there.
Or the other way around, like if your candidate is completely shallow, you also see that you cannot keep up that त्यो ट्रेडिसनल हुन्छ नि त्यो भोट माग्न जाँदाखेरिको नेताहरूको भाषण पोडियममा गएर मन परि बोल्ने खालको भाषण जहाँ इन्साइट पनि हुँदैन के पनि हुँदैन
नो फ्याक्ट चेक नथिङ हुन्छ नि आयो गफ हान्यो गयो
that's also happening on these live platforms actually भनेर that's the impression I get त्यो because one-on-one conversations happen at least some podcasts that we have where these candidates come and speak. There's no rigorous fact checking because हाम्रो inherently अब ठुलो मान्छे आएर बोल्न थालेपछि ठाडै क्वेसन सोध्ने चाहिँ अब
छैन अझै पनि जियो हजुरी स्टिल
सटल वेजमा छ त्यो भूषण दालले सोधा याद छ मलाई अलिकति शार्प क्वेसन विजय कुमारले सोधा याद छ अनि इन्द्र लोहनीले सोधा याद छ इन ओल्ड पोलिटिकल टक सो पछि पछि द्याट्स अहिले पनि त्यो अब मैले नहेरे धेरै भयो बट आई द लास्ट टाइम आई वाच फायर साइड वाज स्टिल वेन भूषण वाज रनिङ द्याट सो सो युड सी द्याट अलिकति हाई पावर क्यान्डिडेट्सहरू पनि दे बी पुट इन टु अ कर्नर इफ इट वाज अ टफ क्वेसन त्यो चाहिँ आई डोन्ट थिङ्क वेयर देयर येट आई थिङ्क देयर इज टाइम फर दिज individuals to gain credibility in terms of asking political questions. Reach चाहिँ acknowledge गर्यो like you said like यो podcast hostहरूको अनि टिकटकर्सहरूको जोसुकै होस् I think the reach has been acknowledged that these guys are important भनेर I think the next step is that they recognize okay this is an important source of information जहाँ चाहिँ candidates can show what they are worth भन्ने shift चाहिँ I think that will happen by the next election. There's one channel that I'd recommend if you've not checked it out. Sandesh Patia भन्ने एउटा journalist छ इन्डियामा. So he used to work for Scoop Up, once attempted a political channel, Scoop Up Unscripted भनेर. अनि something happened, he quit. So he runs something called I think it's called Unfiltered. होइन and he's a funny guy, but he knows where to ask the sharp questions.
Sandesh is the guy with the long hair, and who covered the
guy,
who covered the farmers' protest the entirely. I'm a huge fan. He's like one of the best. Like he's got like journalism with facts, everything, but then एकदमै neutral journalism, but with some sense of humor. Okay, so it's like
it's very relatable.
It's the perfect mix. Like हाम्रो generation को लागि that's the perfect mix. It's not like boring journalism पनि छैन. But it's just that perfect sprinkle of humor here and there, perfect sprinkle of sarcasm, okay? That are also like very extremely like good coverage. Oh yes, that's a very good recommendation. If you have people, Scoop Up Unfiltered, is very nice.
I think Unscripted was the old and now the channel that he runs is called Unscripted with Sandesh Patia or something like that. It's very sharp. I think मैले अस्ति भर्खर हेरेको थिएँ, he did this thing. Rahul Gandhi is doing big campaign of some sort. अनि त्यसपछि यात्रा गरेर रहेछ अनि he was covering that. It was a very chilled out sort of this thing, होइन? You get to see the person, you get to understand the person. We don't have that yet. I think this is going to come about. I think because reach acknowledge गरिसकेपछि at some point somebody who's good at this stuff will combine that reach with some insight and I think we'll get somewhere त्यो चाहिँ.
So besides, I like the social media scene that's going on in Nepal अहिले. But that being said, Abu, I think we get to हाम्रो अर्को article जुन चाहिँ हामीले कुरा गर्ने भनेको थियो. We talked about Shehbaz Deva. Let's talk about his wife.
Yes. Two things happened, which was part comedy, part depressing. I don't know where to classify this. I read two things. First one, I know for a fact that this happened. So let's start with that. Arzu Deva in some promotion said, हामीले जित्यौँ भने चाहिँ फ्री भिजा र फ्री टिकट दिएर विदेश जान इनेबल गर्छौँ मान्छेहरूलाई भनेर.
विदेश जान फेरि भनेको घुम्न जानु पठाउने भने हैन फेरि.
Exactly.
Bangkok trip को कुरा गरे.
अनि the whole problem is अहिलेसम्म लोकल इकोनोमी बिजोग भइरहेछ, मान्छेहरूलाई भित्र बस्नलाई एन्करेजमेन्ट छैन, प्रोसेसेसहरू इज भएको छैन भनेर that's the big debate. अनि त्यसपछि outright you're saying पोइन्टै छैन बाहिर जाने हो क्या रे, हामी त्यो सजिलो बनाइदिन्छौँ खालेको.
Exactly. She's like, we'll send more people abroad to work, and especially in Malaysia and like Qatar and stuff. Is like, oh, like, more the Qatar where tahu futan.
And the second piece of ridiculous news, which I couldn't fact check, so I take this with a grain of salt. I couldn't find a reasonable outlet that said this, so I'll give them the benefit of the doubt, but I do not put it past them to say it. I read that she said, when Sagar Dakal was doing this Gardailo campaign, ekdam त्यो ग्रासरुट उसमा यो ठाउँबाट यो ठाउँ जान्छु म, यो दिन होइन, गाह्रो छ नि त नेभिगेट गर्न. इट्स नट लाइक काठमाडौँ अब्भियसली होइन. अनि हर होल थिङ वाज कमसेकम हेलिकप्टर चढेर आउन सक्नेलाई भोट दिनुपर्छ भनेर. इट्स रिडिकुलस. बट अगेन आई कुडन्ट फ्याक्ट चेक दिस, सो I apologize if this is an exaggerated piece of news, but then that's also quite ridiculous.
I mean, it might have happened, it might not have happened, but if it did happen, it's pretty ridiculous.
To be honest, if it did happen, I'm not surprised. So that's why I think.
But again, when you look at this, and one thing I realized is like, कस्तो चाहिँ मान्छेहरूलाई target गरिरहेछ क्या. So when we talk about election, हाम्रो election को outlook is very different. हुन्छ नि, when Arju Deva is giving this speech there are actually people जसले चाहिँ who farming के उनीहरूलाई काम or जागिर पाउँछ भनेको लाइक त्यो इज लाइक कि द सिटी कि द काठमाडौँ जानुपर्छ होइन and like she's giving them that false hope that khadi mulkma or like somewhere abroad is where the money is and she's going to send them to the money for free okay so you see where that exploitation is also coming into play okay त्यो like बिचारा गरिबहरुलाई like targeted ad के कस्तो त्यो हुन्छ नि so like मलाई यो त्यो आर्टिकल पढ्दाखेरि चाहिँ like this say I was like very not so good.
And this connects with the second thing we have on the agenda, which is also happening right now, the World Cup. Right?
Yes.
And two things are happening at the same time. Ektira Arju Deva is saying, "Hami tabalai free visa ra ticket dera काम गर्न पठाउँछौं." There's this other segment in Kathmandu saying, "यस्तो exploitation भएको ठाउँमा भइरहेको World Cup हामी हेर्दैनौं" भनेर there's this other movement going on, and this is happening within the same 150,000 square kilometers. It's the same place. It's a 1 hour flight between these two locations, pretty much.
Exactly. All right. So before we go into the World Cup, let's start off. हाम्रो आजको दोस्रो कुरा. हाम्रो आजको दोस्रो कुरामा चाहिँ something यता अहिले लन्डन अनि युरोपमा भइरहेको हाम्रो क्रान्तिकारीहरूको कुरा गरौँ. So there's a lot of protests going on. युरोपमा पनि जर्मनीमा नेदरल्यान्ड्समा अरू धेरै कन्ट्रिजहरूमा अनि प्लस लाइक यहाँ मेन चाहिँ लन्डनमा भइरहेछ अनि द मेन फ्याक्टर इज म जुन युनिभर्सिटीमा पढ्छु त्यसकै साइडकै युनिभर्सिटीहरूको अनि लाइक मेरो युनिभर्सिटीको पिपल आर अल्सो लाइक एक्टिभली इन्भल्भ इन द प्रोटेस्ट होइन अनि इट्स कल्ड जस्ट स्टप ओइल सो द मेन डिमान्ड इज द्याट द युके completely stops signing like any new oil or gas for any projects at all.
Exploration contracts basically. Don't find more oil is what they're saying.
Don't find more oil, don't use more oil. अनि उनीहरूको चाहिँ is like आजको अझै बन्द गर अनि उनीहरूको मेन चाहिँ tacticsहरू are like pretty interesting what they're doing. I'm pretty sure everybody saw this on Instagram and like TikTok and everywhere where they were throwing like cake and beans and stuff on art and like they're sticking themselves to like museum, they're sticking themselves to like त्यो कता हजुरले पठाउनु भएको थियो नि पोर्सको सोरुममा
yeah and they complained so what happened is they walked into the showroom owned by Volkswagen glued themselves to the floor or was it to the car but then they glued themselves somewhere which is absurd to begin with and energy prices are off the roof in this part of the world right now. So the dealership turned off the lights and the heating and they closed the store because why wouldn't you? Right? And these people were complaining that they weren't given water, they weren't given
buckets to shit on.
Yeah, something like that. The whole point is, what did you think walking in? The protest has to have sort of a purpose or where it's going, you know? What I don't get is, okay, I have a simple question for this whole protest. Sure, okay, you glue yourselves to the floor and sit there. What is step 2? What happens next? Does somebody come in and say, if you unglue, like, we don't want you glued on our floor, we will stop selling cars today because you're glued? Where does that go? Have you thought this through?
I think like the more I've watched the interviews and उनीहरूको main purpose is to get as many views as possible to do the most absurd things as possible अनि त्यो absurd कुराहरू चाहिँ एकदमै I think it's getting out of hand के अब त्यो gluing themselves to the car thing चाहिँ is like funny at this point होइन तर अर्को चाहिँ हाम्रो यता लन्डनमा चाहिँ there's this M25 भनेर चाहिँ is kind of the main ring road जस्तो के अनि they kind of like block the whole road त्यो जुन जहाँ चाहिँ त्यो साइन बोर्ड जस्तो हुन्छ नि त्यहाँ माथि चढेर people have like stayed there and they blocked the entire road यहाँ मेन स्ट्रिट्सहरूमा they blocked the entire roads they vandalized like हुन्छ नि painted on त्यो मेन गाडीको सोरुम्सहरूको वाल्सहरू and like the ब्याङ्कको वाल्सहरू and so stuff like that हुन्छ नि अनि one thing I don't get is winter is seriously coming it's getting like extremely cold in London अनि it's the gas that's keeping this lights running and then it's the gas that's keeping the heat on okay अनि like I get like I don't think अहिले तपाईँ last time भने I don't think अहिले people are anybody is like against हुन्छ नि everybody knows okay global warming is a thing but it takes time okay it's not like आजको आजै like if you just stop all the oil contracts like it's gonna suddenly tomorrow like there's gonna be sunshine and everything's gonna be green and that's not how the world works and मलाई चाहिँ I feel like there's this disconnect okay, where people are literally dying from cold and like the housing prices here are like through the roof the electricity the everything like the energy prices here are through the roof and then like what they're trying to do is so like the disconnect okay
अनि यो मुभमेन्ट्सहरुमा यस्तो अब्सर्डिटी आएपछि one thing that anybody that's a fan of Aaron Sorkin and watched his work will know this example जहिले पनि when there's absurdity in the movement it takes away from the movement and I don't think people realize that for example यो Vietnam War को against मा जुन movement build up भइरहेको थियो नि US मा it was a reasonable movement नि at its core that we are fighting a war that is not doing any good to anybody so this needs to be dealt with that was the objective but then what happened was that movement got co-opted by the yippies whose entire image was हुन्छ नि they actually got a candidate they I think put up a pig as a candidate for some position in the office or something their whole movement was based on doing ridiculous things so that's what the whole movement became about okay त्यसपछि the whole idea of being anti-war was slowly associated with these acts of stupidity
being hippies
हैन अनि that takes away from the movement because it stops rational conversations about why that's a good thing or a bad thing it becomes something that absurd people talk about अनि अहिले पनि झट्टै हेर्यो भने that's sort of the direction things are heading जस्तो के त्यो climate को issue मा अनि we have this conversation like I have colleagues who do climate research and all of that अनि यसो सोच्यो भने chaos को source के हो त अनि I think यसो rationally हेर्यो भने maybe young people in this part of the world are genuinely scared and some maybe they think if you don't do anything the world is going to end in the next 5 years or something which is obviously an exaggeration it's not
a huge
such
exaggeration
thing,
that if you read any research papers from like Bjorn Lomborg because I've been like doing a lot of research on his books so I'm like studying a lot about climate change and like prosperity and all of those things because obviously like यो सबै कुराहरु चाहिँ एकदमै absurd हैन the timeline that we talk about हामीले चाहिँ जहिले पनि we talk about this there's only 15 years left or 10 years left to like redo the whole climate change त्यो कुरा गर्दाखेरि चाहिँ what people don't account for is हामीले चाहिँ what we did was अब climate crisis चाहिँ अहिले छ I mean the earth is getting warmer हैन so 1.5 degree चाहिँ is kind of warm and त्यसपछि what the UN in 2015 came into place भने हामीले यो 1.5 degree मै राख्ने हो भने चाहिँ we'll have to do everything possible shut down everything and then we'll go if we don't do that like 15 वर्षमा हामीले त्यो गरेन भने चाहिँ it'll go above 1.5 degrees है भने है so the threshold is not going to be the end of the world but it's going to be slightly warmer okay so it's going to be a bit uncomfortable अलिकति चाहिँ warmer चाहिँ हुन्छ तर अहिले पनि is 1.5 degrees warmer from the हुन्छ नि couple of thousand years that 1000 भन्दा नि couple of million years that we've lived in but then obviously it's not going to be the end of the world scenario that people always describe say is not happening it's a huge exaggeration so like I think your climate crisis it has to be ekdamai dealt smartly you know where like countries every now and then they're like sitting together and trying to do this your climate change ko kura चाहिँ is very complicated daily यसको यो गर्दा cuz like you can't मलाई चाहिँ अर्को चाहिँ के लाग्छ भन्दाखेरि चाहिँ the generation that we kind of live in is they're kind of finding a shortcut to morality के हुन्छ नि it's like like it or not our generation has a very messy life due to a lot of different factors and I think when you kind of have a purpose you're doing something that saves the world you carry a fucking tote bag and you feel like you're saving the world that gives you some sense of hope okay? I'm doing something for the contribution मैले plastic straw use नगरेर metal straw use गरिरहेको छु I'm contributing to saving the world खाली जुन चाहिँ scenario छ नि I think that gives them a peace of mind खाली के I think that is where त्यो चाहिँ exaggerate हुँदै हुँदै गयो भने चाहिँ you see people who are on the streets and they feel like they're on the streets saving the world के
Yeah, that is beyond me. मलाई चाहिँ I'm not somebody that can relate to any of this. It's surprising, like you said, you study this in much more detail than I do, but it's surprising. I think मेरो त economist go background, that's how I think. For me, it's like it's a trade-off at any point of time. We're trying to sort of, whenever we think about any economic decision, especially financial, we're always thinking about just that when we borrowing is a simple process of moving money from your lifetime. त्यो फ्युचर पोइन्ट्समा आज पैसा छैन तर भोलि त पैसा हुन्छ, सो त्यो भोलिको पैसालाई आज ट्रान्सफर, आज शिफ्ट मात्रै गरे हो. द्याट इज हाउ यु लुक एट बोरोइङ बेसिकली, होइन? यु मुभ थिङ्स, यु मुभ एसेट्स फ्रम sort of, you move assets within your life cycle. So within time, you can move assets. Or because you can move assets between states of the world. That's sort of the whole idea, you know? So borrowing is an example of moving something across time. भोलिको इन्कमलाई आज ट्रान्सफर गर्ने. अर्को चाहिँ states of the world. So in one state of the world, your house stays intact, everything stays intact, and you've got plenty of money. In another state of the world, your house burns down and you have no money. So basically what you're doing is, by buying insurance, you're moving money from this state of the world, the possible state of the world where your house doesn't burn down, to that state of the world where your house burns down, right? So that's the framework within which my mind operates. So it's like, 3ta कुरा गरेर हामीले एउटा चाहिँ we're doing this trade-off between prosperity and disaster, होइन? So भोलिको कम्फर्ट अलिकति आज ट्रान्सफर गरौँ is one thing, होइन? So
there's a genuine flaw with that, जुन चाहिँ यो अहिलेको क्लाइमेट एक्टिभिस्टहरूको जुन छ नि. So यहाँ चाहिँ there's also talks about like limiting growth, and there's also talk about a lot of like making rich countries poorer basically, or like just like giving away हुन्छ नि, or like shutting down. So यसमा चाहिँ मेन फ्लॉ चाहिँ कस्तो हुन्छ भन्दाखेरि, so when rich countries get poorer, people in poor countries basically die. That's how you have to see it. Like they die, होइन? So you have to see एकदम ripple effectsहरू यहाँ, due to the war and everything, due to the inflation यहाँ भइरहेको, like अहिले the world economy नै is kind of अलिकति डामाडोल, होइन? And I feel like अहिले जुन चाहिँ यो gas prices are going up नि, you will definitely, because gas prices are going up पनि, there is a huge, if you go behind, like there was, because like Europe सबैजना मिलेर they agreed to shut down उनीहरूको biggest coal power plants-हरु, होइन? And that's how they got in, like extremely dependent on the Russian gas, होइन? अनि अब चाहिँ त्यसले गर्दाखेरि चाहिँ now we have this extremely high prices of, because everything, if people are aware, होइन? All of that happening, extremely high prices. And now this is directly gonna, because they want to save future ma, there'll be people who will die of global warming. You have to like, you're gonna sacrifice people, like people are gonna die of cold, okay? Then literally like thousands, hundreds and thousands of people who are gonna die of cold because you shut down those coal power plants, okay? Because of the high energy prices, okay?
I'm not absolutely against the idea of, say, I personally believe that if you can trade off slightly slower growth for better outcomes overall, that's a fair argument. But it has to come from a rational point of view. It has to be a balanced trade-off, right? It can't just be तुरुन्तै बन्दै गर्नु पर्यो अहिले यो. That's not how you should do it.
यो एब्सोल्युसनमा काम गर्छ के दाइ सबै कुरा. लाइक कस्तो भइरहेछ भने, when you have to, like, there is a very complex system to how you actually like control climate change, you know? Like one of the major factors to climate change is like countries being poor and extreme inequality, okay? So यसमा चाहिँ एकदम धेरै कुराहरू हुन्छ. There's like न्युट्रिसनको कुरा आउँछ, फुडको कुरा आउँछ, फार्मिङको कुरा आउँछ, एकदमै धेरै कुरा आउँछ के. वाट एक्चुअली के कुराले चाहिँ कन्ट्रिब्युट गर्छ भन्ने चाहिँ एकदम धेरै कुरा आउँछ क्या. जुन चाहिँ यो गाडीबाट निस्किने धुवा र फ्याक्ट्रीबाट निस्किने धुवा भने एकदम स्मल पार्ट मात्र हो क्या, होइन? तर त्यसको रिपल इफेक्ट्सहरू चाहिँ अरू धेरै ठाउँमा हुन्छ क्या. अनि वेन यु गो एट एब्सोल्युसन्स, त्यो एब्सोल्युसन्समा गर्दाखेरि चाहिँ यो एउटा कम्प्लिटली एउटा कुरा सट डाउन गर्नु खोज्यो, लाइक मेन सर्ट एकदम छोटकरीमा भन्नु खोजेको चाहिँ लाइक हुन्छ नि, लाइक हातमा अलिकति घाउ भयो भनेर हातै काट्नु खोज्यो भने चाहिँ द्याट इज रङ, होइन? सो मैले चाहिँ आई सी द्याट ह्यापनिङ के. Like there's something wrong with your hand. There's definitely something wrong. There's definitely something wrong. Climate change is a problem. We need to fix it, होइन. तर त्यो फिक्स गर्नलाई चाहिँ हातै काट्नुपर्छ भन्ने चाहिँ जरुरी छैन, जहाँ चाहिँ गइरहेको छ.
At least let's come up with a plan where we know what step 2 is. That's where I stand. Is not it? And speaking of oil and the election, we can I think nicely go into the World Cup. मैले हेरेको छैन अहिलेसम्म चाहिँ, not for moral reasons, obviously for other reasons, होइन. But what's your take on this? What do you think? Like there's a big movement of people across the world who are saying नहेर्ने because they have blood on their hands and mistreatment by lots of workers and all of that.
For that, I'm genuinely waiting to see how this turns out. World Cup, होइन. तर World Cup in a like अलिकति यसो zoom out गरेर हेऱ्यो भने चाहिँ it completely looks like a one big shit show, होइन, right now. Because like the amount of money spent is just bonkers, okay? Like त्यो मनीमा you could literally like probably save the planet, like some parts of it. You could at least save the climate crisis here, save like 100,000 people, but they were like, so हाम्रो last like 2018 मा भएको World Cup मा I think Russia spent around 11 कि 14 billion, होइन, 16 billion. त्यो भन्दा अगाडि ब्राजिलमा, which was the most expensive World Cup ever, ब्राजिलमा they spent around 20 billion. Qatarma they spent 220 billion. I was like, what the? I'm like, it's crazy. That number is also like legit number, होइन. If you I think if you account for all the bribing and everything that went on, I think that number would be much bigger. But yeah, I think everything that like what is happening at the World Cup भन्दाखेरि पनि I think the more interesting thing is how the World Cup happened. I think like everything that त्यो कतारमा हुनुको लागि चाहिँ त्यो के इन्सिडेन्ट्सहरु भयो नि, I think like that is more interesting. अनि I think that completely tells you the story about how the world functions. Like हामीले सानो we always talk about नेपालमा corruption भयो, यता घुस खुवायो, यता उ गयो. That's like everywhere. It's just in like a 100x view. Okay.
अनि मेरो चाहिँ I don't have a strong opinion against your World Cup हेर्ने कि नहेर्ने भन्ने कुरा, because I think if that's your way of protesting, I think you're 2 World Cups too late. That's how I feel. Mm-hmm. Because this whole thing with at least 1 World Cup too late, if not 2, mm-hmm. 2, 3, maybe even 3 World Cups too late. Because 2010 ma I think Qatar like yo scheduling award gara. Nepal but people have been going to work in Qatar for ages now, and we've seen these numbers come in. This has happened forever. The only way to alert, like boycott maybe if you stopped watching the World Cup in 2012, 2006, like 2010, 2014, 2018, then they might have been like, okay, maybe we're making a mistake. Maybe this doesn't work. People will stop watching. 3 days before the World Cup, when all the people have died, all the problems have essentially materialized. You saying, I'm going to save the world, or I'm going to make a statement by not watching the sport. Sure, don't watch it if you have convictions against it, but then does it do anything? I don't think it does. I think it's a purely symbolic move. And as long as you're also voting for candidates like Sherbadur Deva, who's got free visa, free ticket as a part of their campaign pledge, there is no way. Yeah. Because if not the World Cup, I know.
Just imagine a guy, who's like, I'm not going to watch the World Cup because Nepali are morras, and then goes and votes for Congress. Oh shit, Sherbadur Deva bhanu, Congress still. I mean, we have hope.
From pockets, but then that is I don't know. I don't know. I'm very
mixed feelings. Very mixed feelings.
But yeah, it doesn't add up. Is there a point?
Coming back to your FIFA, like how the voting was done and all the corruption, that people have been suspended here and there. But this happened like years and years ago. Oile ball चाहिँ मान्छेहरुलाई getting into it. तर मलाई चाहिँ सबभन्दा surprising लागेको कहाँसम्म पुग्यो भन्दाखेरि इट वेन्ट अन टु द फ्रेन्च गभर्मेन्ट के दाइ लाइक लिटरली फ्रेन्च गभर्मेन्टको डोर स्टेपसम्म पुगेर लाइक फ्रेन्च लाइक प्राइम मिनिस्टरले होइन लाइक द फिफाको जुन चाहिँ यो युरोपियन त्यो एसोसिएसनको हेडलाई राखेर लाइक कतारको लागि भोट गर भनेको क्या
Was it the French or the Italians? It was one of those that I remember.
French.
Okay.
Yeah, the French president basically what they did was like they had a certain like favors basically. So Qatar bought PSG, and they pumped in a shit ton of money PSG ma, and they also bought 50 Airbuses, okay, which is worth like 18 billion, like so is basically you see where this goes, for like. For the votes, like there were favors being shared. This is just one of the examples. This is like highest example. You can see this with Thailand ko pani FIFA representative and yatauti, Thailand, like I'm so like mind fucked about like how FIFA has such a huge role to play in world governance, okay? Foreign affairs र FIFA को जुन relations हो नि हैन त्यसले गर्दाखेरि चाहिँ I'm just like baffled.
यो भोटिङ अलिकति बायस्ड हुन्छ देयर इज दिस रिडिकुलस स्टोरी ओलम्पिकको भोट हुँदाखेरि चाहिँ मेनी इयर्स अगो दिस वाज अ लङ टाइम अगो व्हेन आई डोन्ट रिमेम्बर आई थिङ्क इट वाज व्हेन द ओलम्पिक्स ह्यापन इन अस्ट्रेलिया त्यो ओलम्पिक्सको भोटको लागि के टर्न्स आउट चिले ह्याड वान अफ द डिसाइडिङ भोट्स अनि वान अफ द कन्टेन्डर्स वाज बोइनस आयरेस इन अर्जेन्टिना द ओन्ली रिजन दे भोटेड फर अस्ट्रेलिया एन्ड नट अर्जेन्टिना वाज बिकज अर्जेन्टिना त छेउमै छ गइरहेको ठाउँ नयाँ ठाउँ जाऊँ न भनेर अस्ट्रेलियालाई भोट गरेर कि द्याट हेज ह्यापन इन द पास्ट होइन बट कन्सिडरिङ वाट्स ह्यापनिङ नाउ दिस सिम्स लाइक सच अ पेटी थिङ होइन
considering what is happening right now is completely it's not even like हुन्छ नि अब कस्तो भन्ने अब it's not even अब साइड बाई साइड भएको भए पनि ल अब लन्डन युएस खाले भइदिएको भए पनि यु गेट लाइक द बायसेस अलिअलि होइन दिस इज कम्प्लिटली लाइक अब ठाउँै नभएको ठाउँमा वर्ल्ड कप गरिदिउँ भनेर डिसाइड गरेर दे मेड अ कम्प्लिटली न्यू एभ्रिथिङ खाले के अनि नाउ होइन अब म चाहिँ आई वाज कमिङ टु इमिग्रेन्ट वर्कर्स तर समथिङ they now come into like the immigrant workers. Now you've decided that all this corruption पछि चाहिँ now you get the vote, you decide that there's going to be the World Cup. World Cup बनाउनलाई त बनाउनु पर्यो उनीहरूको त केही पनि छैन होइन they've got a shit ton of money but obviously they don't have the infrastructure. And then like the number of like हुन्छ नि immigrant workers is just insane. The deaths alone, like you would say known numbers, this is reported numbers, is above 6,750 reported numbers. The unreported numbers, I don't like believe you, or obviously like, this is reported but non-reported.
I think it's reported accidental deaths, workplace injury deaths. So because there's also a lot of misclassified deaths. Co reports just it's classified as a heart attack or classified as an internal problem.
Most deaths in Qatar are classified due to heart problems.
Okay.
Workers so most deaths Nepalko alikati interviews सुन्नुभयो भने चाहिँ everybody says that the cause of death is heart failure त्यस्तोहरु लेख्दो रहेछ के उनीहरुले क्लिपमा चाहिँ. But one of the अर्को shocking कुरा चाहिँ obviously India is a much more bigger country, तर अब Nepal has a much more smaller population than India. तर the number of people like immigrant workers that is so like similar to no one like there's like okay Indian immigrant workers that you number ma you it's a guardian ko usma guardian ko report ma there's like 2711 and Nepali workers is like 1641 okay like if you just take in account the size it's you know that like the Nepal there's like shit ton of people going to Qatar to work in like horrible conditions. अनि अर्को कुरा चाहिँ उनीहरूको working conditions and like the so obviously you have to see how this manpower companies in Nepal work. They basically this is modern day slavery के हैन अनि it's so sad and now you tie that up with हुन्छ नि हाम्रो आर्जु देवालले भनेको कुरा and it just like plays around it's just like how like it just makes me sad like so all these guys यिनीहरू सो यो फ्रीमा पठाइरहेछ, दे गिभ यु मनी, त्यो मनीले तिमीहरूको पार्टी फन्ड भइरहेछ. इट्स जस्ट सो स्याड म्यान, इट्स जस्ट सो स्याड. पिपल आर डाइङ देयर. लाइक टु गो डिप इन्टु दिस इज जस्ट
द फ्याक्ट द्याट मतलब लाज लाग्ने कुरा चाहिँ गर्नु हुँदैन कि अरू जे भए पनि, मतलब लाजै लाग्ने कुरा, पचाउनै नमिल्ने कुरा चाहिँ गर्नु हुँदैन चुनावमा पनि. द्याट्स टु मच, एट लिस्ट कमिङ फ्रम समबडी हुज बिन प्राइम मिनिस्टर 5 times. टु मच. तर एट लिस्ट अन द पोलिटिकल साइड. तर वर्ल्ड कपको चाहिँ बेसिकली नहेर्ने भन्ने चाहिँ स्योर, डोन्ट वाच इट. बट देन सिन्स द्याट ह्यापन 3टा वर्ल्ड कप भयो, अनि त्यसपछि 3टा चुनाव पनि भयो नेपालमा. I think if this is when you decide to protest, you're maybe a little bit late.
But I hope at least like our late never than I mean keep on saying it's better late than never, and at least now like the world is shining a lot of light on Qatar and everything, you know. Until you also know how these people are being treated, how our people are being treated. And
exactly.
So they are literally living in a small part of like designated area on a designated area ma is just the industrial zone ish भनेर छुटाएको छ. अनि obviously all these workers are not, they're not going हामीले जस्तो visa apply गरेर काम खोजेर is not doing that. Obviously they're bought in by the company, and as soon as you arrive you give them the passport, and then like you're just at their mercy, and so at the company's mercy who's hired you, and you just put them in this like dorm पनि नभन्नु मेरो, just like rows and rows of like rooms, and you just live there, you live inside. And कस्तो हुँदो रहेछ भन्दाखेरि there's buses, okay? So you can't even use the public transport, you can't use anything, you can't even like walk outside, okay? You can't even walk outside. तब you're gonna ride that bus and you go straight to the whatever construction site, work all day at that construction site, and then like come back, and like that's your life, okay?
Data.
So obviously, and another alikati funny story चाहिँ, again, there's no alcohol sold at the World Cup, which is very funny. I think like the fans were like cheering, we need beer भनेर the first game. So that should be interesting how things play out, you know. We'll watch and see how this is going to go on for quite some time, another couple of weeks. So let's see how the World Cup turns out. Let's see how the election turns out. And this should be fun.
Yeah, if there's anything particularly interesting, we'll get back to it in 2 weeks.
Yes.
Yeah. So before we wrap up, you have 2 recommendations.
Yes. So आजको लागि we've got 2 recommendations. जुन चाहिँ Johnny Harris भन्ने एकजना journalist हुनुहुन्छ. We'll link the video down in the description if possible.
And we'll also link any of the articles that we read during the process of exploring ideas for this particular episode. So basically, everything we talk about, जुन article pieces सबै कुरा is going to be down below. If you ever need any of the further कुराहरू, just like watch that. अनि त्यो recommendation मा चाहिँ he's made 2 videos about FIFA, and the other video is about the immigrant workers. So the 2 video चाहिँ I think is short and it's very well produced. So I would highly recommend watching those. So that is the recommendation for this week, and thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you guys soon in a couple of weeks. Bye-bye.